Detroit, we're also joined by Grace Lee Boggs, who has just published her umpteenth book. It's called The Next American Revolution, Sustainable Activism for the 21st Century. Grace is 96 years old, here in New York, though headed back to Detroit, legendary activist. Grace, talk about where we are today and where we need to be. I mean, certainly Detroit is ground zero for the economic downturn.
Well, I think that we are at a very critical time in the history of the world. And I think that there's a sense out there to which the President and the others do not speak, that this is a time when we have to make very deep changes. I think people understand that the empire is dying, that the welfare state that it made possible is also no longer possible, and therefore that we have to begin recreating our relationships with one another and with the rest of the world. And it's a very troubling time for most Americans, but it's only, I think, a relatively small number who understand that we have to create the world anew and that we have to call upon the powers within ourselves to do that. It's a huge moment, and we're very privileged, actually, to be part of that moment and to speak to it not from the White House, not from D.C., but from our sense of what people are searching for. The first chapter of our new book is called These Are the Times to Grow Our Souls. I think some people recognize, I'm not saying all people recognize that, but this is really the time to grow our souls, to begin making a life and not just a living, to begin talking about things not in terms of budgets and how we can use this sum of money and that sum of money for that purpose. People are suffering economically, but I think they understand that the issue is not an economic issue. It's the question of how shall we live? How shall we continue the evolution of human beings? What does it mean to be a human being at this time on the clock of the world? And I think we have to speak to that. I don't expect President Obama to speak to that. And that's why I don't think demonstrations and protests are that meaningful. From the White House, you talk about history in a different way. You try and tell people that the American dream is not dead, that we can bring it back to life. And people know, in a sense, that it is dead, that we have to create a new American dream, and that the opportunity to do that is a great privilege, a great challenge.
Grace, you're 96 years old. When you got your Ph.D. from Bryn Mawr in 1940, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the president. He was someone who saw the need, the moral issues of political leadership as well, and really sought to indict those who had created the crisis of the Depression. But now you're saying that you believe that that the real revolution is not a political one, but is a cultural one, or as you're saying, in terms of reshaping our relationships with each other. But how do you respond then to the millions of Americans who are out of jobs, who say that they may want to change their relationships to other people, but they also have to be able to make a living to support their families?
Well, that business of making a living, I think, is what we need to challenge. I think that in Detroit, because of the devastation of deindustrialization, we recognize that we have to reimagine work, that we have to reimagine how we relate to one another. We have to see that the jobs that paid us income also turned us into consumers and robbed us of some of our creativity and robbed us also of our obligations to one another and robbed us of our relationships to community. and that we have to restore those. And that's part of what human beings have done through the ages. And that's the privilege to do that. It's difficult, but it's also a challenge.